Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar on India's universities, a global perspective with Phil Baty, who is the Chief Knowledge Officer at Times Higher Education, or THE as it is known as. I'm Dr. Pushkar, Director of the International Centre Goa. Before we begin, on behalf of the International Centre Goa, I would like to convey to everyone who is watching and everyone else who will be watching the program, the video recording of the program sometime in the coming days, that our thoughts, prayers, and best wishes are with you during this time of an unprecedented health crisis in India and around the world. I also have a quick announcement about our next webinar on pandemics, past, present, and future on 5th May 2021, which begins at 4:30 p.m. IST with Thomas Abraham and Chinmay Tumbe, both of whom have written excellent books on the subject. I'll just quickly share the poster of the program and then continue. A very quick introduction of our guest today, though Phil Baty needs no introduction to those who follow world university rankings. He has been heading the Times Higher Education's world rankings for over 10 years and is responsible for the methodology used to assess and rank universities. He has also conceived the annual THE World Reputation Rankings and 150 under 50 rankings, and established the THE Asia University Rankings and the BRICS and Emerging Economies Rankings. In 2013, he founded the THE World Academic Summit, which has become an enormously successful event. Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let me begin with a harmless sort of a question. Why do world university rankings matter? I mean, in the sense that I have been following them for about 7-8 years. Maybe I noted them first about 10-15 years ago when they first started to emerge. But by now, there are so many kinds of rankings, and every few months there is some ranking or the other. And in the end, I mean, I have to ask myself, and for those of us, those who are watching you, why do you think that world rankings matter?
Thank you. Thank you. No, it's an important question, of course. Let me first say before I start that I also send my deep sympathies to all of our friends and colleagues across India who are suffering with the pandemic. I'm delighted to see that the United Kingdom, the aid support has started to arrive. You know, the world is obviously uniting in support of India at this difficult time. It's a global crisis. We all share responsibility and share a collective responsibility to act and support and help people who are really struggling. So I send my deepest sympathies and support to everybody in India, and of course all of many other countries that are suffering terribly at the moment from the pandemic. In terms of why rankings matter, I think, you know, there are really multiple stakeholders. I mean, at the very first level, we see the World University Rankings as something of a geopolitical indicator, a sense of showing the changing nature of the knowledge economy. So actually, on that level, it's a tool for university leaders, university presidents and vice chancellors to make policy decisions, to assess their performance, to benchmark against the best universities in the world, and governments to assess the effectiveness of policies, to compare policies globally. And again,
sorry,
to benchmark.
We seem to have an audio problem, and the video is also frozen up. Phil, sorry, we had an audio freeze for a bit, audio and video freeze for a bit. So I'm not sure what exactly happened. So could you please repeat, sir?
Sincere apologies. I have a cable in, so hopefully we'll have fewer problems, but forgive me if it's from my end. Yeah, so I think the rankings have many stakeholders. They have, of course, government and university leadership stakeholders. I said that I believe that rankings form a very interesting global picture of the knowledge economy. We're actually looking at the strength of nations, the strength of institutions in terms of creating new knowledge, making a contribution to the knowledge economy. So actually university leaders can use rankings to assess performance, to benchmark their activities, to set their strategy, and governments can use rankings to understand the relative effectiveness of national education policies. So they're very important as a geopolitical indicator, a knowledge economy benchmark. Of course, they're also used to help inform faculty career decisions. We have a very mobile academic community. So people are moving across borders all the time to make career choices. And then finally, we have, of course, a really important stakeholder, which are students who are internationally mobile, highly ambitious. They want independent, trusted data to help them understand their decisions. You know, one of the most important decisions a student can ever make is going to be the investment in their education, who to trust with their education. And rankings can provide a starting point, objective and independent source of information for students. And that's really, really important to inform their decisions. So multiple decision makers, multiple stakeholders, but they really do matter. They influence student behavior, they're influencing government policy, they're influencing university strategy. And I think that's right. We want to help students make the right decisions to improve themselves. We want to help universities make the right decisions to deliver more and more powerful research and teaching. And we want government policy, of course, to be informed by global benchmarks and global data and global best practice.
Taking off from that, I mean, in the sense that universities matter, we know the university rankings matter. I mean, for some people to a greater extent, for others to a lesser extent. What we have seen over the past decade, especially, and more so in the last 5 years, I think, is there has been a proliferation of world rankings, world university rankings by a bunch of different organizations. Even countries themselves, governments themselves have gotten into the business of doing national rankings. India has started its own ranking system about 2-3 years ago. Second, there have been growing criticisms about the methodology used for assessing universities' performance. Of course, there have also been attempts, and THE is a classic example of that, where you have constantly tried to improve your methodology. Of course, there are criticisms of that too. But I'm sure in your position, and I have to say this, I'm sure in your position, you make friends very quickly and then lose them every now and then once you change the methodology, and some universities lose their place. Anyway, so the second part is about the complexity of these different methodologies. And now there's serious research on what exactly is going on with these rankings, all of which is together very, very helpful in many ways. Now, the problem seems to me is that somewhere along the line, we have gotten all mixed up. We want to see our universities, we want to see India's universities somewhere up there. And because, you do not place a university, say, in the top 200, you say, well, we are there in the, BRICS and emerging economies list. So that helps. We are in the South Asia region. So Asian rankings, we are somewhere over there. It sort of becomes tiresome. Somewhere, I mean, obviously, we cannot stop anybody from, doing this exercise of ranking universities. But how would you respond to this massive proliferation of rankings of all, which sort of defeats the purpose of actually ranking universities, when there are so many different ranking organizations to choose from?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think the most important thing to get clear, really, and I feel very passionately that there is no single model of excellence. We have a very, very diverse global community of universities, and they often have different missions, they have different priorities, they have different histories, they have different governance structures. So I think it's important to say there is not a one-size-fits-all model. There isn't a single vision of excellence that everybody should aspire to. So the world rankings, of course, are created to sort of idealize what we would describe, I think, as a world-class research university. It's about research excellence. It's about producing new knowledge, publishing that into global research journals that get disseminated and spread new knowledge. It's about having a global reputation. It's about, attracting talent globally. So the world rankings are a one type of university. The Harvards and the Stanfords and the Oxfords and Cambridge sit at the top of those rankings, the global research intensive university. But we recognize that there are other universities that don't have the resources to be at Harvard, or don't have the desire or the mission to be Harvard. There's universities in India doing an outstanding job of transforming communities in rural areas, for example. Their priorities might be simply getting people a basic education, skilling up a local workforce through teaching without much focus on research. There are universities in India doing amazing work towards delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. So we do believe that actually we don't want to create a sort of homogenization of the university sector. We don't want to say, if you're not like Harvard, you're somehow not a great university. So in some respects, that does mean a proliferation of rankings and perhaps a confusing array of different rankings. But I think actually that's healthy, because it's saying to universities, you can be strong against your own mission, your own priorities. Rankers shouldn't be driving your mission. Ranking shouldn't be determining your strategic direction. We should support your strategic direction. We should give you data that you need, that you find helpful to set your own course, but different rankings should be available. I think the problem comes where you have exploitative rankings or simplistic rankings that perhaps can have perverse incentives. So, you know, universities that play too heavily on reputation, they can be easily manipulated. You know, universities that have very simplistic metrics like faculty student ratios in a high proportion, they can be gamed, but they can also distort the focus of education when we're now working in a very blended learning environment with remote and distance learning, for example. So Times Higher Education has an approach where we have different rankings for different missions. We have the world rankings. They then filter into regional rankings to put things into context. For example, emerging economies, they have less wealth, less resource. Asia, for example. And then we have an impact set of rankings focused on social and economic impact, which Indian universities do incredibly well in. And then we have teaching rankings. We do a teaching ranking for the Wall Street Journal and other outlets where we focus on the learning experience of students. So I know it can be frustrating and confusing, but I do believe it's positive. It also takes away some of the power of rankings to say, this is what excellence looks like. Universities should determine what excellence looks like, and we should just hold a mirror up and give them the data and the tools to set their own agenda and set their own mission.
Phil, actually, that very long answer, you have said things which I was going to ask quite separately, but I'll get to them anyway a little later. For everyone who's watching, we'll also have about 3 or 4 questions at the end. So for Phil Baty to answer, the program will be approximately 50-55 minutes, and we'll try to accommodate at least 3 to 4 questions at the end. So please be patient. Now, I have been writing on rankings a little bit here and there for national newspapers and such. And I get the sense, and what you say is perfectly true. It should be up to the universities themselves to recognize themselves as institutions which do specific things. Not all universities can devote themselves to both research and teaching. Many, in fact, most in countries like India, we are a less prosperous country than Western democracies, for example, or Japan or China or Singapore, even South Korea. So most universities should be devoted to teaching. To the extent that the gross enrollment ratio in India is about early 30s, and the aim is to get it up to 50. Now, given that context, of course, universities themselves, but it is also their governments. I'd say the perversity of rankings in a way may not have to do with the ranking organizations so much as the university administrators and the respective governments themselves. Now, what has happened as a result of these rankings, which you can keep on emphasizing that this is primarily about research universities, when you have these world university rankings. But for some reason, university administrators and governments, in this case, quite often the Indian government has been guilty of this, is that they do not recognize that not all universities should be necessarily participating in these rankings. Of course, in the national rankings, you have a different way of calculating rankings, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So the idea should be only for elite universities, flagship universities, whatever you call them, in India, for example, to be participating in national rankings, say 100, 50, then whatever number that the government comes up with. What are your thoughts on this? Should only select universities be participating? What can organizations themselves like THE do to encourage universities to be doing it? Because the universities seem to be taking a lot of time. I know university administrators in India, and when the ranking season comes, so to say, they say, well, for the next couple of months, half a dozen of us faculty members who are part of this committee or the other will be collecting data and sending it to THE or somebody else because these rankings are very, very important and all that. So how do you make this point more forcefully, probably to the participating universities, that not all of you need to participate in World University Rankings?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, every country really has a very stratified system, and that does perhaps mean to some extent picking winners. China's been a great example. They have a huge, vast system, very similar to India's. It's undergone very rapid growth, similar to India. And their government policy was very much to select a group of universities that would be on the world stage, that should be competing globally. And that's been very successful. It does mean a tiered structure. It does mean the focusing of resources at a higher level. We have to be very careful around not assuming every university should all chase the same set of metrics, and really understand the power and importance of diversity. As you say, in India, my belief passionately is that India, the size and great legacy and heritage of scholarly thinking, some of the first ever universities in the world were from India, a nation of such intellectual might and such huge democratic strength and such economic potential, needs to have universities that compete on the global stage. You need to have your own Harvard, your own Yale, your own Stanford, your own Oxford or Cambridge, because we need to make sure that Indian talent is retained, that Indian ideas and Indian knowledge are being created in India, that we don't have brain drain. India can attract talent rather than lose talent to other nations. So I think India needs world-class research universities competing on the global stage, but absolutely that doesn't mean the entire sector should chase rankings. We should make decisions. There's a step towards that, of course, with the Institutions of Eminence program. I think that's a step forward to say, well, let's give these universities more support, more autonomy, more resourcing. The exact level of that, I think, is something that needs to be discussed and agreed within India on your priorities. But yes, my sense is we should be very comfortable in saying these universities are local universities that primarily are in the business of education, providing skilled graduates, resilient graduates for the future economy, get the young people able to contribute to the fantastic economic growth that India should be experiencing. Other universities are global research powerhouses. Some might be national. So I agree, we should be tiered and we should send that message out. One thing we do with the world rankings is, of course, because it's about research-led universities, we have a threshold. You have to publish a minimum of 1,000 papers in world index journals over a 5-year period. So we will actually say to universities, unfortunately, you may not qualify to be in the ranking. And globally, there's probably around 3,500 universities that may fit our criteria. So 20,000+ universities in the world, only 3,000 or so will be eligible for world rankings. But the other 15,000, 20,000, we would say we'd still be happy to work with you to provide data, benchmarking, support for your own mission. And that could be around social impact, local impact, it could be around teaching. But I agree, we need to be more clear in what the ranking is trying to measure and why each institution should feel it's part of their mission to be benchmarked in that particular group.
I think perhaps another way to look at it is that, and governments should, and especially countries like India, where you have a very large and old tradition of public education, and this is true for several, for European countries as well, is that public universities should be given select public universities should be given more preference. Of course, that obviously creates some kind of a distinction between elite universities and the rest. But teaching really is something that public universities need to focus on, also because they are able to provide that education at a lower cost, much lower cost than private universities. Um, Now, this is a problem which you mentioned earlier already, gaming the rankings. I think 2 days ago, Times Higher Education had an article on British universities which are busy identifying a large number of its teachers as teaching staff, as opposed to, I guess, teaching and research staff, because they have some kind of assessment coming up, and government funding will depend on that. So gaming the rankings is something, we can idly blame Chinese universities for doing that, or even Singaporean ones, which seem to be far more dedicated to breaking into the rankings. It's a matter of national prestige and such. I mean, it's not as if, I'm sure that there are Indian universities too which are trying to do the same. But is it something that, that you are aware of? And obviously, how do you try to counter this problem of universities trying to game the rankings?
Yeah, I mean, there's a challenge, I guess, that once you create a set of metrics, universities, being incredibly smart and intelligent entities, will look to potentially maximize their performance against the metrics, and the metrics become slightly less powerful. As I think Goodhart's law, isn't it, that once you set something as a performance metric, it becomes less powerful as a performance metric. I think the secret really from Times Higher Education's perspective is actually around the methodology itself. So Times Higher Education's world rankings have 13 separate performance indicators looking at a full range of activity. So first of all, we set metrics that gaming them in theory should genuinely improve the institution. So, publish more research in the best journals with a global standing. Make sure you publish more higher quality research that has a higher impact judged by citations. Draw in more research funding, be more successful in pulling in talent, because we look at your ability to attract international faculty and students. So all those things should be positive. I'm pulling in more talent, I'm potentially going up rankings. I'm publishing higher impact research, I should go up rankings. So a lot of it's around the metrics being genuinely indicative of excellence. You have some areas of great weakness in rankings, I believe. If you put too much emphasis on a reputation survey, if the reputation survey is quite easy to manipulate, let's invest in providing names and contact details to reputation surveys so we can just send our message and potentially influence the surveys. Or if it's a faculty student ratio with a very high weightage, let's just look at how we define a faculty member, or how we define a full-time staff member. So you can iron out manipulation through the methodology, which is something Times Higher Education sought to do. But within that, of course, there are all sorts of areas around getting clear data definitions. We've created a single global database of quite simple information around industry income, around total research income, total income, around a full-time faculty member definition. So being very open and explicit about definitions, also working closely with the bibliometric providers around any potential signs of manipulation of the bibliometric database, self-citation clubs, or new journals that spring up that are, quite clearly highly unusual in terms of citation behavior, that all that can be monitored. And we have taken steps in the past, not in the recent past, but over the years, we have taken steps to exclude universities from rankings if we feel there are data outliers that can't be adequately explained through normal practice. For example, extremely unusual citation behavior. Or there was one example, I think, in the past of a university simply writing to all the highly cited scholars in the world, asking them if they join the faculty part-time and put their name on the paper. So there is a lot of that. We have to be very alert to it. And the ultimate sanction, of course, is exclusion. And of course, with Times Higher Education, because we're a publication, a daily news outlet, we can also keep universities accountable and keep ourselves accountable by obviously having this big open scope for reporting and challenging and questioning the data. And the more we put it out into the public domain, the more we can hold it up to collective peer-on-peer scrutiny.
Phil, I have to let you know that among the people who are watching us, who have joined, is Professor Ashok Mishra, former director of IIT Bombay. And he has several questions. We'll take two of them later at the end. He was a two-term director of IIT Bombay in the early 2000s. And his institution has been among the top 200 at some point or the other. But he has some very difficult questions for you, but we'll take them up a little later. You have countries around the world, and you have cities particularly around the world. The Boston area, Silicon Valley area, Seoul in Asia, Singapore even, in China again, you have these particular areas where you have a lot of knowledge production taking place. So moving on from knowledge dissemination to knowledge production, this is where you have top-notch scientists, top-notch people in different disciplines, working in different areas. Now, we also call many of them. In Toronto, for example, I remember the Montreal area was considered a knowledge hub, higher education hub, or a knowledge hub. In recent years, countries in the Middle East, West Asia, Dubai in particular, Abu Dhabi, and some other places which have started to really focus on higher education, and they have gotten American, British, and Australian universities to set up shop. Not always successfully, but they have been very, very serious about making Dubai, for example, a higher education hub. Now, in different degrees, they have also succeeded. It's part of diversifying their economies, getting top-notch talent to come and not just work in Dubai, but also study in Dubai. Who would have thought study in Dubai 10 years ago, 15 years ago? But now it's happening. Now, here in India, it's not as if we do not talk about higher education hubs. The government of India has often talked about, some parts of India, deliberately locating some higher education institutions in particular areas for the development of that region. But higher education hubs have typically emerged in and around cities, Delhi, for example, or Pune, Bengaluru, and other places. Here in Goa, where I live, where we are, there has also been some talk of developing Goa as a higher education hub. It's on the World Tourism Map. For me, it seems the next natural step forward. You have people from all over the world, all over the country coming here. Yes, they come here for the beaches, for the churches, for whatever else. But if they can come here for all those reasons, surely they can come here to study, which would also help diversify the local economy, which has been far too dependent on mining and tourism and pharmaceuticals. How can state governments, and Goa is pretty much a city state, what can state governments do to develop, to give that push for making the city or a small region major higher education hub? And you already have these advantages that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think, obviously a case like, a case like Singapore is very much driven from the very top of government, that recognition, of course, that a nation, a city state like Singapore is utterly, has no natural resources. It just simply has human resources. So making Singapore a place for human talent to thrive, research and development, and it's very much a concerted top-down effort. Obviously, India is starting to see some fantastic geographical clusters of excellence. Chennai is a good example. There's a real concentration of great universities. I think the biggest barrier to India is simply bureaucracy. We've had places like Dubai, for example. They have lots of branch campuses. They've I think the other place in the Middle East, which is a good example, is Qatar and Doha. They've created the Doha Education City. They've simply gone out and actively reached out to the best universities in the world, primarily the US institutions, said, come over here, come and set up a campus. We'll co-fund it with you. We want you to bring your faculty. They've given huge amounts of favorable support in terms of funding and red tape being removed. and they've actively gone out and said, we actually want the best here, so we'll reach out and facilitate. And they've set up branch campuses in the Doha Education City, similar to some extent in the UAE as well, in Dubai. The biggest issue for me in India is going to be that red tape. There's been the national education policy, which I think has been very, very well received and actually has some excellent initiatives in it. The big one there is getting rid of the barriers to entry. Indian universities aren't international enough. They should be able to set up their own campuses in other countries, just in the same way that other campuses should be able to set up here. So I think the government need to facilitate, sweep away red tape. They need to provide, whether it's administrative or financial support, to sort of really incentivize participation. You know, some parts of China, for example, have been in sort of free trade zones, much more open opportunities to set up with various benefits around taxation or finances. So I think you have to have a very concerted top-down effort in terms of building the infrastructure. Also build up your own institutions, so there's a head of steam, there's a critical mass of excellence within the region, and so the local institutions are strengthened. And then the other aspect is probably marketing. You know, it's a harsh reality of a competitive global environment, but battling for talent is a big industry. Even if you're not as marketized as the US or Australia or UK, you still want that talent, so you have to sell yourself. And that's where I think Goa has a fantastic advantage. You know, students are attracted by the geographical location, the benefits of lifestyle and culture, and of course Goa has some fantastic assets there. So yeah, a combination of features, but marketing is a big part of that.
There's been some talk that academic freedom should be part of the ranking system. And, you know, I mean, here in India, some of us would, you know, be clever about it and say that once you introduce academic freedom into the rankings, then China's universities will disappear. These days, it's possible that some of our own universities, you know, wherever they are ranked, they would rank lower if we introduced academic rankings. I mean, that's how it is. But what are your thoughts on that? Should academic freedom be part of the rankings? I mean, I think it's a very, very serious issue, because when you think of universities, you think of some kind of autonomy from the government. I mean, even if you have, you know, a centralized system of governance and so on, but at least they should be relatively free of the government to be able to not necessarily say the things that, you know, not necessarily dissent, but also say things which are which may not go down well with the government. So how far do you think that the rankings organizations are missing out on by not including academic freedom in the rankings, in the parameters for rankings?
Well, certainly I personally believe that academic freedom is an absolute foundation stone of all great universities. You know, I think we need both institutional autonomy, as much freedom from government as possible, so universities can manage their own affairs, can be not constrained by overbearing government priorities or again, stifled from certain activities by government. They should be have institutional autonomy. And of course, I believe passionately that academic freedom is a cornerstone of great universities. What I would hope is that actually this comes through in rankings anyway, that, you know, the very top echelons of rankings are clearly institutions that, you know, admittedly, they tend to have lots of wealth and other great advantages. But, you know, in the United States of America, for example, or Great Britain, where some of the greatest discoveries are coming from this free environment where universities are free to follow blue skies research, curiosity-based research. There's a really interesting mix between the STEM disciplines and the arts and humanities and social sciences, that understanding humanity, questioning received wisdom, all fits together. You know, I think universities should be the conscience and the critic of society, as people say. So I would believe that academic freedom will be part of the magic formula that helps universities achieve excellence in rankings. But I think to put it in as an actual criteria in rankings is too much of a value judgment. You know, we want to provide quite neutral data about who is doing excellent research, who is doing producing great new knowledge. And of course, you could certainly suggest that perhaps some universities in the non-democratic world, where there are real constraints of freedom, they presumably, and I think the data will show, they won't excel in the arts and humanities as much. They won't excel in some of the social sciences, and we'll see that in rankings. But I think if we imposed it as an actual criteria in rankings, we might be guilty of then distorting the reality. You know, there's no question, for example, that China is absolutely leading the world now in research into artificial intelligence. We need to reflect that reality. That's a geopolitical reality that China is doing outstanding work across lots of STEM disciplines, engineering, etc. But computer science, AI, they're world leading. So I wouldn't want to artificially impose a set of metrics that would dampen down or hide away that excellence, because I want the rankings to be as much of a reflection of the reality of world science as possible. So I think we have to be a little bit cold and neutral with data, that we want scientific excellence to come across from any country, whether that's in the global north, in the global south, or the east or west. And a reality of the world we live in now is actually there are a significant large number of powerful non-democratic nations. Now, I believe longer term, they will never reach the upper echelons, the very top of rankings, if they're not be able to allow their universities more freedom and more academic freedom. But I think imposing it in rankings is very problematic, because it will distort the actual reality. And we're in the business of giving people data that reflects the reality of strengths in all different disciplines.
Phil, I'll place two questions from Ashok Mishra, Professor Ashok Mishra, former director of IIT Bombay. Then I'll have another question from me, and then a couple of other questions from the audience. Professor Ashok Mishra has made several points in the Q&A section, and one is that India's universities are hurt pretty badly by the internationalization dimension, foreign students, foreign faculty, etc. Now, you have a university system in India. Now, private universities are just coming up, and their salaries, at least for a select number of faculty, are substantially, or at least higher than what is there for other faculty members. The point is that, and especially after COVID, I anticipate that the number of foreign students coming to India is not going to improve. In fact, it's probably going to be lower for several years now, ditto for foreign faculty. The COVID experience is going to transform things in a big way as far as internationalization is concerned. But why should internationalization be such, and I'm extending the remarks made by Ashok Mishra a little further. Why should internationalization be such an important aspect of rankings?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the challenges of a global ranking, of course, is that you have to look at parameters that are sometimes quite simplistic, in the sense that we need data that's consistent and able to be applied across the world. And of course, different systems have different challenges and different priorities. So we do give it a relatively low weighting, 2.5% weighting for international faculty, 2.5% for international students, and then another 2.5% for international research collaboration, which of course can be carried out without travel, can be done remotely, and it doesn't require visa. So we do recognize actually that India traditionally has been penalized by those metrics around international talent. But I think we felt when we created this ranking, and that was actually back in 2004, we first created it. We revised and reviewed the methodology significantly in 2010. We just felt that these institutions that we're judging are global research intensive universities. And I think we felt on a subjective level, you can't be a global university without being globally collaborative. We can't together tackle the world's great grand challenges without sharing, collaborating, and knowledge across borders. So we felt that was an important principle. I think we also felt that the mobility of talent was an indication of relative quality in a sort of marketplace for talent, that if you can attract talent, it is an indication of your desirability. Of course, we recognize that's not as clear cut, so we give it a relatively low weighting. We are actually undergoing what we call Rankings 3.0, another methodological review. We're taking a long time. We're taking a year or two to review it, but we will be looking at perhaps whether we can be more sophisticated with that international outlook metric, particularly around, you'll see, for example, if you're Luxembourg, you do incredibly well. If you're Switzerland, you do incredibly well, just by the nature of where you are, the multiple borders, your dependency. If you're in the Middle East, you do incredibly well because you're highly dependent on an immigration-led economy in some respects. If you're right smack bang in the middle of America, you're less likely to do well. So we recognize difference. So we will, I think, attempt to apply some more sophisticated metrics around that to recognize the geographical diversity in the different contexts. But fundamentally, we believe, and I believe passionately, India should be embracing this, that a global research university is a global institution, and we should be sharing and working across borders as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Phil. This is something for everyone who's watching, this is something I shared with Phil earlier. I said, look, what we are both going to do is we'll pretend to be chief education advisors to the government of India. And I said to Phil, look, you come up with 3 recommendations and I'll match that with 3. So here we go, Phil. What would be your 3 recommendations as chief education advisor to the Prime Minister of India?
I mean, that's a big responsibility. I'm happy. I'm normally the person who just reflects the data back, but I think, I mean, there's no question, it's a harsh reality. There's no question that money is hugely important. So I think investment is number 1. India needs to invest in strengthening its universities and building its research base to retain the talent, to keep hold of your great researchers. We have some of the world's leading technology corporate leaders, of Indian origin. The Indian diaspora is doing amazing things outside of India. So I think investment in your talent, investment in building the university infrastructure, money is vital. Then I'd say perhaps internationalization. I do believe that we live now in a global sector. We are globally interconnected more than ever. The pandemic demonstrates that absolutely, that we are absolutely all connected. We share global challenges, not just the pandemic, of course, but the next global grand challenges, particularly climate change. We need to work across borders. We need to share knowledge together. That's the most powerful thing universities can do, I think, in terms of making the world a better place. So internationalization. And of course, it helps you improve capacity, learn from one another, draw in different perspectives and different ideas. So it's inherently positive in that sense. I think maybe the third one I'm torn between, and actually all of these I would say are already emerging in the national education policy and the NEP. I'm torn between cutting red tape and promoting interdisciplinarity. But I think promoting interdisciplinarity is super powerful. We need to make sure we're not too narrowly focused. STEM subjects must merge and connect with arts and humanities subjects to tackle those big issues like climate change, to push forward new knowledge. It's going to be at the boundaries of disciplines. But maybe I'd say actually bureaucracy and red tape, I think from my experience, has been one of the things that has hampered India. I don't suggest a complete free market. We've seen some problems with the UK moving perhaps too rapidly into a very marketized system for universities, and not in any way all positive, some real challenges there, but red tape, giving universities more freedom, more power to be more dynamic, to not be stifled by too much paperwork and red tape, allows them to be more dynamic, allows them to be more responsive to the changing world. And that can hold universities back. So yeah, money, internationalization, bureaucracy would be my 3.
Okay, thanks, sir. Okay, to the extent that it matters, my top 2 recommendations, and I struggled with the third one actually. The first one I think is that political parties, political leaders should get out of the business of governing universities. They should not be on governing boards of universities. They should not be the ones selecting vice chancellors. Let academics do it. Let them do it badly, let them learn from their mistakes, let them suffer, but let them do it. Unless you leave the business of higher education in the hands of academics, we are going to continue to experience the same kinds of problems and challenges that we do today. Second, I think there has to be greater focus on faculty in terms of faculty recruitment and faculty promotions. The NEP, as you mentioned, Phil, has a lot of good things going there, despite all the criticisms that have been made by several people. But there are a lot of good things there, and the part about faculty recruitment and promotion is something which has to be interpreted in the right manner. And unless universities do it, you will not get the best people you have. A few years ago, one of India's leading columnists, social scientists, made an observation that India's best social scientists are not working at India's universities. They are at think tanks and they are in newspapers, they are doing something else. So the challenge is, and scientists who are working with private companies rather than with universities or national research laboratories and such. So the challenge really is, I think, and this is something which any government should take seriously, is to get your best people to the higher education sector, to your universities and your research centers. A third one is, of course, very, very specific to India, where universities have gotten caught up with, the rankings game, so to say. And they have to recognize that most of them are in the business of teaching. And business of teaching is the wrong way. Their primary focus should be on teaching. And the incentive given by the government to publish and all those things for promotion should be done away with. I mean, unless we do that, the problem of publishing in fake journals, the problem of predatory journals won't go away. And it won't go away because the government continues to give some priority, even if it's 20% to publishing. Everybody will take it. And instead, they should simply be focused on teaching. They should be rewarded for their good teaching skills, improving their teaching skills, and so on. I'll take another question from Anubhuti Arora from Delhi, who asks whether the NEP has a line or two without details. And when asked on it, I think government officials said that this will be finalized at a later date. But even before COVID, and certainly after COVID, do you see any probability of foreign universities setting up campuses in India? I personally don't. But maybe you know differently, you have heard differently. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, taking away COVID, which I think will hold things back for some time. Yeah, the question really is the risk and reward. I've heard views that international universities may feel the risk is too challenging. It's still a very untested space, but I do welcome the NEP and the Indian government's drive to open up India. The big thing for me is, of course, is capacity. That India has this huge youth population. As a massive imperative that we need to make sure the Indian youth are educated, are basically given the skills they need to help India realize its economic potential. So for my sense is there's huge capacity required to educate Indian young people. So I would say if I was a foreign institution with a good brand, I would be chomping at the bit to come and say, I want to do my part. I want to help deliver this transformational change that India needs. But it will, I think, will come down to that whole risk and reward aspect. How much red tape, how much restriction, what are the terms of engagement? And at the moment, I think COVID combined with some hesitation about the red tape involved may hold people back. But in theory, of course, why wouldn't great universities want to come to this your great country and play their part, of course, in educating a huge youth population and making sure we have that demographic dividend rather than a demographic disaster.
There's a very interesting question from Abhishek Sharma. He asks whether THE has plans to take any steps against self-citations. Whether you have, I mean, it's a huge problem, right? for the rankings. So are you thinking of addressing this specific problem now or anytime in the near future?
So with the rankings 3.0 consultation, we are constantly consulting on that. I think there's a challenge in the sense that there is much legitimate self-citation. You know, if you are absolutely at the cutting edge of a new field, you're at the forefront of your discipline, self-citation can be completely legitimate and appropriate. But when it comes to quite clear self-citation clubs or very active manipulation within a particular journal, within a particular field or year, it can distort rankings. So I think our position on it is that we haven't made a judgment to exclude self-citations yet. There's regular statistical analysis around what it actually potentially does in terms of the ranking results. But of course, we are very vigilant for unusual citation patterns that we can identify at individual universities, at individual paper and journal levels. So we can take action when we see very unusual behavior that's clearly not reflective of the reality. And we have, I think, in the past, not to mention any names, we have asked universities to sit out the rankings during a period where there's been highly unusual citation activity. And then we'll wait as the window moves on to reintroduce them once that unusual behavior has gone. But we work very closely with the data provider Elsevier on spotting and acting on very strange outliers, and then we seek an explanation as to what's happening.
I think we have reached our timeline of about 50 minutes. There are plenty of questions, but I think we should stop now. Thank you so much, Phil, for joining us. And on behalf of the International Centre Goa, I'm happy to extend an invitation to you to come to Goa whenever you are in India next, maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, once things improve a little bit on the ground. And India has a very, very strong, perhaps has a love-hate relationship with rankings. We want to be in those rankings. Our universities want to be there. And we find that we struggle to get in there, except for Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and perhaps IIT Bombay and Delhi. Universities have sort of struggled in the rankings. But things may change in the coming years. I am hopeful that there will be more funding for select institutions, specifically for, for doing better in the rankings. I do not think the whole higher education sector should be geared towards doing better in the rankings, but certainly select universities should be allowed to compete better. Thanks, Phil. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk, and I very much look forward to visiting in the future. And I wish all the best to India, the universities, of course, and I believe the education reforms taking place will put India in a very strong position. Times Higher is here to support and help in any way we can. So thank you very much.
Thanks.